So let's talk a little bit about definitions that we use in Section 7 consultation. You know, we're famous for saying words mean things, and this is particularly true with definitions that have legal basis and legal ramifications. Unfortunately, we use definitions in consultation that come from a variety of documents. They're not all in one document. So let's talk a little bit about where they come from. The first place you want to look for definitions comes from the Act. So here's the Endangered Species Act of 1973. This is amended through the 108th Congress. And in the Act, there are the definitions that many of which we use for consultation. Now, some of these we don't use, but Section 3 of the Act is where the official statutory definitions for these terms come from. For example, here's a federal agency. What's the definition of federal agency? What's the definition of the term person, plant, state agency, take? Here's the term for a definition of take. So this Section 3 of the Endangered Species Act is where you will go to find the exact definitions for words that are defined in the Act. But there are a lot of other words that we use, and they tend to come from the Code of Federal Regulations. So if we go out on the web to the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, we go to Title 52, we go to Part 402. These are the regulations that we're pretty familiar with, the Interagency Cooperation Endangered Species Act regulations. So if we go to the definitions, we see that here's the definitions we use quite a bit. Action area, applicant, biological assessment. These are the ones that we use most frequently. Only a few of the statutory terms do we use often. And so here's the exact definitions. Now, the reason you want to have these resources and be able to go specifically to them is that these are legal. These have a legal basis, and we got to get them right. We can't just kind of remember what we think the definition was or what we think somebody wrote in another template or another document. We really need to go to this document and the Act to look for those definitions. There's one more spot where you'll find some definitions, and that is in the 1998 Consultation Handbook. Here's the cover. And if you go way down past the table of contents, the first piece here is the glossary of terms used in Section 7 consultation. Now, in this glossary, you'll sometimes find terms from the Act, you'll sometimes find terms in the regulation, but you also see terms that are only defined as the policy guidance under this handbook. For example, if you take a look at conservation measures, now that's not a term that comes from the Act. It's not a term that comes from the federal regulations. It is a policy guidance term that we've defined in the handbook, and there it is. Now, one cautionary note about the handbook's definitions. There are some examples where the handbook has quoted or appears to be quoting a definition, but it's either not quoted correctly or it's not intended to be a quote. So let's take this for example. Formal consultation. So here's the way the handbook describes this definition. And then it references 50 CFR 40202. So right, that's the definition area of the regulations. Well, let's take a look at that. And let's go out on the web and compare the definition for formal consultation. Right here it is. So let's go there. There's formal consultation. Here's formal consultation. Now, if you look at these, this is the regulatory definition of formal consultation. This is the legal definition. And if you look at the definition used in the 98 handbook, this is more of an explanatory definition. It's borrowing on information from 402.14. It doesn't actually quote the regulatory definition. So you have to be cautious about this. And if you see a reference in the handbook, I would go to the reference. I would go out to that reference and then use the exact definition from that reference. There's another example that has caused problems over the years, and that is the definition of harass. If you actually go to the part of the federal regulations that has the definition for harass, it's actually in 50 CFR 17, and you look at the definition for harass, you'll see that there's a definition 17.3. Now let's go down to harass. So here it's an act means an intentional or negligent act or omission which creates likelihood of injury to wildlife by annoying it to such an extent. You look over here, it's actions that create likelihood of injury to such an extent. The annoying is left out of this definition. So when you're using or quoting a definition out of the handbook and it references the original reference, go to that original reference because you want to make sure you're using the exact correct definition. So the three spots, again, just to summarize, the three spots to find definitions are the Act in Section 3. This is the Act, Section 3. The Electronic Code of Federal Regulations out online under some are in 17.3 and others are in 402.02. All right, here. There's the definitions that we're most familiar with. And then there are definitions in the handbook. Just be cautious how you use that glossary in the 1998 handbook. So those are the three spots where you'll find the definitions that we use most often.